Many people in the world of media understand that over a certain point in time, people switch off.
Something else has happened actually, which really is very concerning, and that is the freedom of speech.
There was a type of censorship that became apparent on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.
Muslims are not known for this type of the actuality of Islam now, where the women are a bit considered to be a bit oppressed.
There's a great many Islamic men and women of knowledge who have been completely whitewashed from history. The people that understood most to be strongest in Islam, the Western Muslims who are understood to be strongest in Islam are the Muslims of the UK.
Hello and very warm welcome to Quews.news from our London studios. I'm Sohail Qureshi, your host today on our program UKNow. We have a very important and special guest who traveled from Norwich, from Ihsan Mosque, to join us and to have a parley with us on rise of Islam in Pakistan and in the world, in the UK in particular, and also importantly that he will tell us how the recent events in Gaza and the far right wing hooliganism against the immigrants and Muslims in UK has affected the conversion or reversion of people to Islam in the UK. Haj Craig Mitchel, who has been an amazing speaker who joined our studio for an interview last year. In fact, he came here a couple of times, and his show, Rise of Islam in Europe, was a tremendous hit. Today, he's joined us again. So without any further ado, so very warm welcome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Right. So how are things from your point of view since the last year that you came here? And things have been really quite distressing since then. I know that you had our program when the Gaza war just started. So I want to have your views on it.
Well, to recap, some of the points raised in that show were that something was being demonstrated by the Palestinians turning to Allah. Their faith was coming across. And we spoke about certain online channels showing the Palestinians reacting to news that their family members had been killed, the neighborhoods had been leveled, yet they were turning to Allah. They were turning in dua. They were turning in dhikr. They were turning in reading Quran. Now, this was being televised to many people all over the world, predominantly via TikTok. And obviously, most of the world is utterly horrified by what's happened. And one cannot beat around the bush in terms of the scale and the utter destruction that the Palestinian people have faced. But the point I was trying to convey is that as Muslims in the West, we had to kind of recognize that the enemies of Allah can plan, but Allah is the greatest of planners. And in all of the grief, there was something coming through on the screens that demonstrated Tawheed. It just demonstrated Iman. It demonstrated the light of Muslims when they've lost everything. It demonstrated their faith. And from that, subsequently, in the last video that we looked at, there was a slew of videos, a great many videos of people showing solidarity with the Palestinians, but at the same time, a great many people saying they're becoming Muslim.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, the events of last 1 year has really transformed the world in a different ways. On one hand, you're right that the Iman or the conviction or the faith in Allah and Islam of our Palestinian brothers and sisters has actually moved the world.
Yeah.
That people with such kind of misery, tyranny, and oppression can still have a belief in a one God, which is actually the God of all universe and the three great monotheistic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But my question will be that do you think that this will propel Islam in Europe and the rest of the world, or do you think the people will be dismayed because of what is happening to helpless Muslims, and the entire Muslim world is and is really watching it with their cowardly silence?
Well, the first thing to understand is the reaction of people to the horrors that we've seen most prevalently in the last year. But of course, the horrors have been going on for many, many decades. But not many people were aware of that to the same degree they've been made aware of it in the last year, with the intensification of the bombing post the October the 7th attack. So people's responses are different, depending on who they are. It's safe to say that a great many people have become used to it happening now, which forms a type of desensitization. We're no longer, as you know, aware in some ways. We're no longer able to quantify the horror that many of the Palestinians have been facing. We're not able to really comprehend it in the same way. It's a typical thing, and I think many people in the world of media understand that over a certain point in time, people switch off. So you could say that the surge of the events post this renewed, or the latest saga in Gaza being bombed, since then, there was a surge of awareness, and people were witnessing things that they could not imagine, and they're witnessing these things being justified. We all remember many great world leaders showing a reticence to call for a ceasefire. And you know, this kind of exposed a type of reach that you know, certain people in the world have over other people. So politically, people became more astute. In terms of the one-sidedness of the political system, people became more astute. So the whole thing has been an education, but people have been educated in different ways. So with many of the people who Allah so decides, they started asking questions about Islam, simply because they saw the level of faith that the Palestinians had in the resilience.
The events of 7th October were the most ghastly, and no Muslim, let alone a human being, can condone that, because the terrorism against Israeli civilians was really unheard of. And as much as one condemns that, but the reaction to that going on, and that has actually exceeded any kind of oppression and cruelty that human race has seen since the Second World War. And something else has happened actually, which really is very concerning, and that is the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, the way it has curtailed all over the world, and especially in the European and more civilized countries, where the central part of their society, or the British values, we talk about UK, was the freedom of expression. And that will have a huge effect for the years to come.
Well, from a point of view of journalism, it's safe to say that it's understood now that the internet and those who appear on the internet, those that cover commentary on things, of which there's many thousands and thousands of people, depending on their viewership, have become like the journalists to some degree or another. So what we saw, and we mentioned last time quite briefly, there was a type of censorship that became apparent on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. So we saw that to a degree whereby individual account holders on Instagram, for example, they'd post a Palestinian flag or something showing that they have solidarity with the Palestinians, and then subsequently they would find the videos that followed would receive less viewership. Mm-hmm. So we don't know how these things are worked, but there seemed to be a pattern. There was many people that said this. The one provider of media that wasn't curtailed in the same way was TikTok. And a great many of the stories of people showing solidarity with the Palestinians and talking about looking at Islam and talking about becoming Muslim, many videos emanated on TikTok, and they were subsequently shared on different platforms like YouTube. But they got through and they were viewed by a great many people. So the traditional media, of course, is always controlled. We know this. There's a certain angle that comes across. But really what you had, the scale of what was happening could not be coded or worded in a manner that lessened its horror.
What surprises me is this, that yes, the events of 7th October, and we all know that the entire saga of the plight of Palestinian did not start on 7th of October, and before that there was a continuous illegal occupation of Palestine. That is the root cause. However, one thing is very clear, that a very vast majority of the world is on one side, especially on the ceasefire. If you remember, about three or so months ago, about 156 countries decided for a ceasefire, including a number of European countries, and only 12 countries, including the America, in fact, foremost, opposed it and vetoed it. And that is a very strange thing, actually, that when there are so many killings, so many innocent people dying very brutally, what has happened to humanity? And you being a Westerner, and I call it 3W, white, wealthy Westerners, from the America and Canada and UK and France and Germany, what is your view as a human being? So what is happening to the human race that, we, no matter what side you are actually celebrating the decimation of humanity, whether they are Palestinian or Israelis. So why human beings have divided so far apart from one another?
There's different answers to that depending on the types of human beings you're speaking about. Those in the media ostensibly are forced to be complicit with following a particular narrative. And it's safe to say that, many of them are deeply shamed about that having happened. Many of them are openly speaking out about the type of one-sidedness in the reports. And there's different ways in which that's done. It involves a bit of analysis to understand the one-sidedness behind these things. But what has to be made clear is that in decades, people will look back on this and ask, why did the public not do more to try to stop this from happening? Why did the politicians in countries out with the area not try to do more to stop this from happening? And the questions will be asked, how on earth that can happen? In a similar way, when we look back at some of the horrors that have occurred in the world in the last 150 years, many people find it inconceivable that people in particular countries would support their leaders, who are in turn supporting genocide, with the different scenarios of the way the wars have worked in the last 150 years. Many people would ask, how could they have sat there and allowed this to happen? So as for many of the people in the network, in the system of reporting these things, I think it's safe to say many will be quite traumatized by the fact that they, in some ways, aided and abetted the, kind of covering up, as it were, the one-sidedness of what's been happening.
Do you think there can be some rapprochement between these two ideologies, although it's nothing to do with a particular faith or religion of Islam and Judaism, because all over the world people live very peacefully, especially in this country, and it is more political issue which has become military issue in Palestine and Israel, but it's heartening to see that a number of people from all walks of life and faiths, they have come together, whether they are Jewish or Christian or Muslims or Hindus or non-believers, and they want not only a ceasefire, but people are start talking about the permanent solution of the situation.
I mean, there's been a great effect that this has had on people, and many people have asked me, is this one of the main reasons why so many people are becoming Muslim? Now, again, in our mosque, in the last 2 years, there's been an increase. many people posit the question to me, why is this happening now? Particularly, we're seeing an increase in young men becoming Muslim, where for 15 years, it wasn't really the case that young men became Muslim. It was older men, perhaps, coming in who've kind of had time to think about things and are quite clear with what they're doing. This whole thing with younger people becoming Muslim, particularly young men. So there were several things I attributed to that, and I've given that more thought recently. There's different stages of people contemplating the reality of their existence, the reality of what they understand about Islam, and their connection to those who have answers or appear to have answers. In other words, what connections do they actually have to Muslims? Have they met Muslims? Islam has been on in front of them in different ways. And what are the factors behind this kindling of interest? Allah has power over all things. So anyone that's come into Islam is by the power of Allah. Yeah. But there's a pattern to things in creation regarding the types of indications from the circumstances they're facing, the things that they're witnessing, the people that are popping up in front of them. There's a pattern. So I've thought that recently that it's very likely that the lockdowns were the start of many people questioning their own existence and thinking about what they are doing in the world and why they're living, what they're born for. And again, you can't generalize. It's not that everyone was contemplating the meaning of life in lockdowns, but a great many people were. So one doesn't want to generalize when speaking about these things. But depending on the inclinations and, of course, what's destined within the individual, many of the things that stopped people from thinking about the bigger question were withdrawn. We're not allowed to even see other people. People couldn't go to their girlfriends' houses or their boyfriends, or they couldn't see loved ones. They couldn't ostensibly go into the shops and indulge and look around in the same way that they could before. So many of the things that you could say, that some of the things, not all of them, that held people back from asking bigger questions about their own existence, many of these things were removed.
Yeah, you're right. COVID had a huge effect on all human beings when you saw so many people literally dying like flies, left, right, and center.
Yeah.
And it was a huge catastrophe, similar to the Spanish flu and all the old medieval type kind of pan diseases. And that really pushed people to do introspection, self-analysis, private questioning, vis-a-vis the materialism of the world now, which we find ourselves in a grip with. And that has caused a lot of people not only actually leaving whatever the faiths were, but
leaving their jobs
and jobs and really
shift.
And thinking the alternate ways of living rather than a hamster wheel kind of running, and it appeared that a good majority of those people who are of thinking type, who are critically analyzing the essence of life, they converted to Islam, and
well, it set things in motion.
Yeah,
it set things in motion. Again, one cannot look at things that are happening, any one thing that's happening in the world, and say it's responsible. Allah's using that as a means for bringing people into the deen. But there's threads to things, and there's certainly been unusual things. With the lockdowns, it was a completely new phenomenon that the world had not realized and encountered before. And, the types of news reports, the fear being generated, of course. Really, ostensibly, the thing that people felt most was the kind of boredom with not being able to do things.
I wanted to ask you a couple of more questions on the global consciousness of what has changed in recent months since last year after you came to our studios and also the Gaza war. But since you just mentioned about the recent change or recent rise and revert of young Muslims, I would draw down and tell our audience that you are Edinburgh-born Scot, although you have lost your beautiful Scottish Edinburgh twang. and you reverted about 3 decades ago, and you have based yourself in Norwich for over 2 decades now.
Yeah.
So, and Ihsan Mosque has become the bastion of faith and for people who reverted. So, tell us a little bit more about Ihsan Mosque, and then my next question will follow, which is this about the change in the demographics of the recent reverts.
That's a good one. We should go into that. The Ihsan Mosque was founded as a mosque. It was a community before it was a mosque in 1977, and it's ostensibly identified as people who've become Muslim, people who've embraced Islam from different ethnic backgrounds. It's not only white people. There's many Caribbean, British people who arrived there in the late 80s and 90s. So it's seen as a place where, you could say that people who've become Muslim have an influence. And because of that, it has a different tonality and a different dynamic. Many of the things that other people, who are born in the UK or generational Muslims who have moved here, we've had to go through all of those things to find Islam. We're not kind of caught up easily in the mechanisms of kufr, in the same kind of way. We're all affected by things that distract us from our Lord. There's nobody that is not affected. It's not to say there's a particular community that is reached a type of utopia, because there's no utopias. We know there's no such thing. Even in Medina, 1,400 years ago, there was no utopia. But what it is, that different groupings of Muslims in the UK have different gifts, different things that they can articulate. And, it's very important to understand that the people who became Muslim have different ways of seeing their engagement as Muslims in the West. And, we have gone from kufr into Islam. So with that type of thing, the millah has changed, and we are aware of the previous millah, the previous thing, and we don't go anywhere near it in the same way. Of course, since 77, we now have multiple generations. It's not that you could say it was founded ostensibly by people who became Muslim, but there's now the second generation, the third generation. Of course, we're trying to make them realize, okay, you've born into this thing, but understand what it was that your parents went through to arrive at this, and understand what was there before. Hajj Idris Mears, who you met in Norwich just over a week ago.
Yes, I certainly did. What a pleasure and honor it was.
And he said to you and the other doctors in the meeting, he said, when I arrived in Norwich, there was less Muslims in Norwich than there are in the people in this room. There was about 30 people there at the time. So things have certainly moved on in terms of the sort of imprint that the Muslims have in Norwich in particular. But generally,
why Norwich? Why? That question. It was really circulating in my mind. That why Norwich? We had a scenario where the early community, the founders of our community, which was basically based on teachings of one man, a very dynamic man who became Muslim, called Sheikh Dr. Abdul Qadir As-Sufi. He became Muslim in the late 60s, and very quickly began calling people to Islam in his social circles. People like Brian May, people like Mark Bolan from T-Rex, people like George Harrison and John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and he was in these social circles. So he came back and started speaking about Islam. At some point. I mean, at that time, in 60s, 70s,
I think he came in through a different route.
Yeah, okay.
But he did do itikaf in our mosque.
Okay.
In the 80s.
Stevens,
yeah,
right?
He came to do itikaf during Ramadan. So the community were founded before, this thing was rolling before it arrived in Norwich. And I think it was really a case of, and again, I was 3 years old at the time, I hadn't become Muslim. It was a case of the need to get out of London and to find somewhere more conducive and sane in terms of living and nature and countryside. So they all stayed in a great big house to start off with, called Wood Dawling Hall. And there's a documentary I'd recommend people watch if they want to know more about this. They have to go into Amazon Prime and type in "Blessed are the strangers." If you want to see this documentary, you can't just write in the strangers. You have to write "Blessed are the strangers," and there's a whole documentary on that era. So again, as anyone who was born after or found their footing in Islam after, I had no idea about the ins and outs of what they were facing and living with no money in this great big hall, and having to find things for firewood. And so it was from there that that was a Norfolk countryside, just outside Norwich. They decided to move into the city, and they began looking for a mosque, and they realized, that the city has to be the place where the community should grow. Yes. And this was ostensibly people who, and many you could classify as, before they found Islam, they were of a hippie form, or they were just seekers, not necessarily hippies, but people that were looking for answers. So they moved into the city centre, found the Ihsan Mosque, and that was around 77, and were given by Allah, were given the funding to buy the building, and everything kind of moved on from there. I arrived in the 2000s. Okay. So there's all sorts of stuff that had happened in that time.
So it was quite established, this especially for people
100%.
from Caucasian background, let me put it that way.
Allah puts gifts in different cultures.
Yes.
Allah puts gifts that are resonant with attributes, divine attributes, and attributes of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in different cultures. So I'd say right now, it's a place to benefit from different cultures.
Do you have any number of reverts in last, say, 20 years or 30 years?
Oh no, we don't.
You don't do that. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Okay. And the general impression was that somehow, we like it or not, and that's really paradoxical, that most of the reverts were the Caucasian or British or European women in the past. But I think that earlier we were having a discussion that on recent 1 year or so, you have a lot of young men who are actually reverting to Islam. So have you seen any pattern there, or?
There's general things. I mean, again, look, people respond to what they see in front of them. They respond to personalities. They respond to people who've been given prominence. And irrespective of what you think of the man, there's no doubt Andrew Tate had a resonance with a great many young men. So people are 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, learning about this figure from someone, and somebody who, kind of like champions to some degree, whether or not what he's saying is correct or not. He's advocating, I'm somebody to help men. So you had this figure popping up who's saying, I'm helping men, and other figures popping up that were kind of similar to that. And there's no doubt that when Habib Nurmagomedov, who became obviously well known for MMA, mixed martial arts, he had a kind of imprint on the psyches of a great many young men. It's not that all young men watched these things. It's not that they all came in, but he was a phenomenon in some respects. He was going on stage saying, I did not win my fight. Allah enabled me, gave me the power to win. The power is with Allah. And teaching everyone in the audience,
amazing statements, from somebody.
So this was an occurrence that took place. Now it was kind of an oddity for many people, but it was in the years following when Andrew Tate became Muslim. It's like, hang on a minute, what's this? So people are actually becoming Muslim. They're resonating what this guy's saying. And again, to some degree, Andrew Tate was involved in the world of MMA at some point as well. So there's this thing, where, but really he took it
more like a role model at that age. And you're right that the imprint of such role models can be very deep, especially in this era that we're going through of faithlessness, basically, or rudderlessness of the youth.
Well, there's not many, when I was growing up, there wasn't really many male role models apart from Hollywood actors, television personalities, politicians, people with money who you hear about. You see, it was kind of like a lot more uninteresting. But, with the event of the internet and people like Andrew Tate becoming Muslim, it just, there's a different thing can happen, whereby people are aware of these influencers and saying naughty things, which no doubt Andrew Tate did say. Now, I'm not advocating Andrew Tate here. You've got to be very clear. He did say some things that were completely abhorrent. And we don't defend that as Muslims. Yeah. But he stood up with a sign saying Islam. and continually stood up with it. Now, the point behind anyone holding a sign to Islam is that more often than not, unless you can meet the person who's holding the sign up, it points to other than where the person is standing. So what you had was people then looking online about what Islam was, and many people actually talking to Muslims who were around the same age, younger, 14, 15, 16, whatever age they might be, talking to Muslims they've known. All of a sudden, there's a kind of change, a shift. And many people, as we've talked about in the past, who came to our mosque, some of whom were 14 and 15 and 16, three boys who turned up saying, two of us have become Muslim and this one's on his way. And they were 15 years old, I think. So this kind of thing was occurring, and I think that is one of the things that has put, Andrew Tate, again, as imperfect as he is, and quite obviously imperfect with many of the things he exclaims, nonetheless, he stood there with a sign saying, "Look at Islam, I'm Muslim," and didn't just do it once.
Obviously, Andrew Tate has been known for his misogynist and very kind of a bold statements, and also kind of a male figure in this world where the women live and a different type of freedom movements are there. So he kind of stood up the not very chivalrous, I would say, but somehow the kind of male, and that resonated with a lot of social media watchers or followers. I think that is where it is.
I mean,
so
just to add to that point. Yeah. I mean, the thing to understand is that it's nothing. The validity of Andrew Tate's religion, or his deen, his sincerity to Allah. It's something I can't judge.
Yes.
I have no idea in terms of his practice. I know he said some absolutely ridiculous statements. Even recently. Over a year after becoming Muslim, in many ways show a type of short-sightedness about the geopolitical system in the world. But again, I'm simply making the point, he's somebody who's famous, that put Islam in front of people. Just for that alone, irrespective of his actions.
It is a point to signposting, because as you know, the most important thing is this, that the people came closer to start inquiring about Islam.
But it did something.
And this is a century-old cross versus crescent battle that we have going over. And now we are at a stage where the actual messages or lessons of Islam are becoming prevalently known to people.
Well, the messages are not. You see, this is the point. Tate's not teaching Islam. He's not going online.
I didn't mean Tate. I'm just simply saying signposting.
Absolutely.
To Islam, and then people start their own personal inquiry and all that. And it is fascinating to see the very fundamental of the teaching of Islam and our Prophet Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and what it was, the emancipation of women in particular, the kindest messages of law and jurisprudence when you compare with the contemporary religions of Old Testament and Torah and even Christianity.
It's a very good point.
It was amazing that for Muslims are not known for this type of the actuality of Islam now, where the women are a bit considered to be a bit oppressed. But it was Islam which gave women the right to inherit, right to own a property, right to own a business, right to marry whoever she wants, and so many, and respected, which unfortunately has been really swept under the carpet, which actually people start finding now.
I mean, there's a great many Islamic men and women of knowledge who have been completely whitewashed from history. And I suggest people do their own research, but in terms of the origins of what became known as the camera obscura, modern surgical instruments, algebra, You see, people can look this. I'm not a historian.
Al-Khwarizmi, Ibn Sina, there's
Ibn Sina.
Abbas
There's so
Ibn
many.
Farnas.
Muslims need to know that, and they certainly need to know that these things were kind of excluded from history, and history became, really in the last 30 years, it became all about the First and Second World War. That's all that history really taught. Then it was European history before that, but in terms of the influence of what fed into this renaissance of modern European thought was, of course, ostensibly something that was an influence from the Muslims. And people can look at that by themselves. There's countless documentaries online. The thing to remember is that in this day and age, the role model for Muslims is not an influence on TV. It's not somebody who is famous. It's not somebody who is a star in a car. This is not the main archetype, the main human reality behind Islam is the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a thing that once you enter into Islam, the connection with the Messenger, the meticulousness through which the Muslims try to learn every nuance of what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam did, and they try to act on it. This is what you find. You see, it goes way beyond these TV personalities who might have conjured an inkling into what this thing actually is. Following on from that, we're not, again, part of what I've spoken about in the past is the need to find community. You need to find a grouping of coherent Muslims and live in close proximity to them. It's very hard to learn Islam online, and our previous shows have talked about that.
I know that we started from a particular direction of this interview, and we really covered a lot. I just have a couple of more questions, and the most important question for me is the demography of United Kingdom. At this moment, there are about 6.5% Muslims here, and according to one research, since 2001 to now, the overall demography of United Kingdom is changing vis-a-vis the Caucasian to the non-Caucasian, and where it was in 2001, roughly about 90 to 95% Caucasian, it has gone to 74.5%. So in about 30 odd years, and in last 1 year alone, there's been 13.4% more non-Caucasian who have come to the United Kingdom through immigration, through increase in the population with the high birth rate of Muslims, and a vast majority of them are Muslims. And hence we see the far right hooliganism and the racism that we have seen a few months ago, not only against the immigrant, against Muslims. Do you think it will have an impact or conversion or reverting of people to Islam?
With certain people, it certainly has had an impact. In terms of people becoming Muslim, as I said, by Allah, anytime Islam appears on screen, there was an interesting thing that post 9/11, of course, that attack was squarely blamed at the feet of Muslims, and Muslims were highlighted as being the conspirators behind that particular occurrence. And of course, it was horrific. There's no denying that this thing that happened in the middle of New York, a place that everyone's familiar with, was a horrific thing. It was very traumatic for people. Yet we saw the queues of people wanting to go and learn about Islam in mosques following. This is a very well-known thing. And again, the thing to make clear is they were not all anarchists who wanted the World Trade Center to fall down. It was simply because Islam had come in front of them. And this is what we see. So, in answer to your question, anytime Islam comes in front of people, there'll always be those who ask the question of what is this thing? Is it really, what these people are indicating? Is it true? Or I know these Muslims. They're not like the people that are being shown to me on the television. What's very important to know is that in the UK, in terms of the demography of who's who, that the dawah, the sharing of Islam, it happens in not that many places. but it's happening in a very strong way. One of of course, with the predominantly Pakistani Muslims who came here in the last 70 years or before then, is the establishment of shops and you know, and then there's a rapport with the public, and you're not just serving Pakistanis, you see. So this was always a thing where, you know, no matter how many pictures they showed of Osama bin Laden on the news, you know, the old lady would look at him and look at Mr. Amjad, who's working in the corner shop, and say, but they look the same, but Mr. Amjad's lovely. You know, I'm not going to think that all the people that look like this are
not stereotyping, basically.
Sure, but the other place is the taxis. And this is something that many people are aware of, is that many Muslim taxi drivers, you know, there's a whole thing whereby they introduce the topic of Islam. And
You've forgotten the Indian curry, which is also primarily prepared and served by the Indian and Pakistanis, actually.
But it's really the places where you have the potential for a conversation. You see, to think about it. So, you know, in a taxi, you're going on this ride, and you're sitting with a Muslim guy for half an hour. It's something that many of these men make the intention of sharing something about Islam with the passengers, of which are several dozen every day.
Yes.
So you think about this. Look at the numbers. You know,
sensitization and the message.
In every single taxi with a Muslim taxi driver, if they feel so inclined, I'm not saying all the Muslim taxi drivers are saying this, but they test the water, they try. Now, the third thing, and this is something that quite a remarkable clip that I had shared with me, that I might, you know, I'd certainly suggest people try to find, is that it was a right-wing kind of activist who was very, very right-wing, who became Muslim. And he got in touch with a friend of mine and said, you know, you've got to hear my story. And he was interviewed, or rather he filmed himself. So a member of his family, I think it was his daughter, was critically unwell and she needed to be operated on. And all the men, the consultants and the surgeons, he said, all of them were Muslim. And they saved her life. And she's living now. So he realized the entire ethos of this thing with Muslims being in the UK and immigration, you know, it's not all one thing. And he became Muslim because of this.
Yeah, certainly. So there's a great role model. Well, with that, Haj Khalil, thank you very, very much for your very thoughtful analysis and your statements that you made, which I'm sure will help a lot of people. And just before we finish our program, I just want to give you one more chance if you want to give any message to people who are watching this program and to fellow human beings.
Look at the different groupings of Muslims in different Western countries worldwide. You've got Muslims in Canada, Italy, France, Spain, Germany. I became aware through a trusted source. The people that are understood most to be strongest in Islam, the Western Muslims who are understood to be strongest in Islam are the Muslims of the UK, predominantly Pakistani. And you know, if anyone viewing, you know, has a little think about that, what they've encountered about, you know, maybe the Algerians in France are quite beaten down. The Turks in Germany, predominantly Turkish. Again, I'm not saying they're all, but predominantly Turkish Muslims in Germany, you know, is kind of a thing with the secularism thing, you see, where they've had that already. So they're not really, you know, you could say that they're not seen generally as being a unified, very, very strong body. The Muslims in Canada ostensibly are quite liberal, a lot of them. Now, again, I'm generalizing. I'm not speaking in a disparaging way about any individual Muslims in these nations who turn to Allah regularly and are strong in their deen. I'm saying generally. And again, the Spanish situation, where the Spanish are very, you know, we're not going to let any of these guys become strong because they've been strong in our country before. For several hundred years, they were ruling Spain. Look at the UK. With the amount of Muslims that are coming to Juma every week, the strength of the fact that we're not allowing our children to be educated in things that are not concurrent with Islamic teachings, or rather, we're not allowing the anti-Islamic teachings or things that run completely contrary to Islamic teachings. We're not allowing that in our schools. The Muslims in the UK are perceived worldwide as being some of the strongest Muslims living in a Western land. And that's what we need to take away with us from this. Because it's all very well, lots of friends of mine who are Pakistani, they talk about the cultural thing. They say, oh, but we're very mixed with culture. It doesn't matter. If the deen is remaining strong within the hearts of the Pakistanis in the UK, if they're turning to Allah, if they're putting their heads on the floor 5 times a day, which if they're not, they have to start doing, because their life is too short not to do that. If they're doing this, then they have nothing to fear, because Allah will protect them. It doesn't matter about the rise of the right wing. Let's not worry about that. And of course, I'm a white man living in Britain as a Muslim. I'm a lot less likely to get trouble than Asian Muslims living in Britain, because it's really to do with race. The racism is a race thing. It's not predominantly to do with Islam. It's to do with immigration. But again, wala hawla wala quwwata illa billah, Allah has power over all things. If we turn to Allah and recognize what Allah has given us, and recognize that we're a lot stronger than other many groupings of millions of other Muslims living in Western lands, then we need to lead with this strength.
Excellent.
Let's avoid the division, and let's see ourselves as one body, and appreciate that, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really, really amazing and very inspiring thoughts. Well, with that, I say thank you very, very much to Haj Khalil, and who had been an inspiring figure in Norwich for a lot of new revert to Islam. We take Islam and humanity, actually, they are mutually exclusive. You cannot be a good Muslim if you're not a good human being, and vice versa. We believe that the egalitarian and fundamental and core characteristics and teaching of Islam are known to everybody, because at the end of the day, we are human beings first. And whether you have a faith or you have no faith, you must follow the peacefulness message of humanity, where people can coexist and live in not only the United Kingdom and in the world. We hope and pray that the peace returns to Palestine, both for Palestinian and Israelis, and the Palestinians, just like Israelis and the rest of the humanity and human beings in the world, have their own statehood. And while United Kingdom is the best country in the world for its tolerance and its respect to human values, and especially for the Muslims and Pakistani Muslims, we hope that the far-right fundamentalism is converted to more humane ways of looking at the demographic changes in the world, and the peace prevails. So we say thank you very, very much to our dear audience for watching this program. I hope it was as enlightening for you as it has been for me to speaking to Haj Khalil, and we'll see you next time. And have a good evening. Thank you. Bye.